and welcome to Owls About Stats. It's the new show doing Sheffield Wednesday by numbers. Hence the name, Owls About Stat. Just got the nod ahead of Three Twats with Some Stats, which was the runner-up in our competition to come up with a name. Now, if you've listened to any of the FFP podcasts, then you'll already know us three. We've kind of been looking for an excuse to do a real geeky project together because, you know, FFP wasn't quite geeky enough. So let's meet the trio. First of all, we have our statistician, Peter. Hello.
Hello, and good evening.
So I imagine most people will know you from the FFP pods. Peter Lohman, you are in Denmark. You've been a Sheffield Wednesday fan for longer than you care to remember.
I have, yeah, since the 92-93 season.
So this new podcast gives you a chance to marry together your two true loves, Sheffield Wednesday and shitloads of numbers.
Pretty much, yeah. That's what I'm hoping for anyway.
Okay, we also have our strategist, James Allen.
Good. I was going to say good evening, James, but it's good afternoon from New York.
It is also the day before Thanksgiving, isn't it, where you are?
It's Thanksgiving Eve, correct. Yeah, which is a holiday like no other.
I don't get Thanksgiving. I'm not going to lie. I don't understand it.
Well, that's because you're British, James, and you don't live in America. There's very simple reasons why you folks over the wrong side of the pond don't understand the beauty of a 5-day holiday where the entire country shuts down. Oh, Christmas. We don't celebrate Christmas in quite the same way over here. So Thanksgiving is like the big family holiday. That's the easiest way to analogize it. So today, all of America is in chaos as people try to fly thousands of miles to get back home to friends and family. And I sit tight in my apartment in Manhattan and basically drink beer and speak to people about numbers and Sheffield Wednesday. So happy holidays, folks.
Sounds like a plan. So as you may well have gathered from that, I'm James Marriott, and my role in this is the realist. So I was thinking, actually, just cast your mind back, just barely a couple of months, we were talking about the best start to season for Wednesday in the championship since we got promoted. It's been the best since that. How things change over the course of a few weeks. And actually, when we first started talking about doing this show, I think it was going to be probably a different show to what it's ended up being by the time we've actually got round to recording it. So the show it's about cold, hard facts. Nothing more, nothing less. We pore over various different stats, lots of numbers, and kind of try and figure out what it all means. The three of us love a good stat, don't we? It's a bit of a tester episode for us. It's an idea that we've been talking about for a while. But we're just kind of trying it out, seeing how it goes. We'd be really interested in hearing your feedback, and we'll see how often we get to do it. It might be something that we do every month. We'll kind of figure things out as we go along. So the first section that we come to is the season so far in numbers. So everyone's got something to say about Sheffield Wednesday's season so far. Generally not all that good, but what do the numbers tell us? And Peter, let's kind of set this from the outset then, because there's lots of acronyms, there's lots of initials, there's lots of kind of words that you'll use that mean a lot in the world of football stats, but might not do to the layman. So just give us kind of like a bit of a glossier, if you will, of what we need to know at this point about the various different phrases that we're going to hear over the course of this podcast.
I mean, the big one is definitely expected goals, which has really broken into the mainstream over the past couple of seasons. And I think even the BBC uses it now in some of their shows. What it is essentially, though, is it's a really geeky name. It's a really poor name, but what it really is a measurement of how good a chance is depending on the location the shot is hit from, the number of defenders between the ball and the goal, if it's a headed ball, if it's from a cross, if it's after a dribble. You can add all sorts of things into it. But essentially, it's a percentage chance of the shot being a goal. So if you have a penalty, for instance, roughly about 3 out of 4 penalties end up as a goal. So that gives you an expected goal of 0.75 or 75%. And that's really what you use. So if you have someone reaches goals this season, only have expected goals values of like 3 or 4%, because it's from so far out that no one who shoots from there tend to score unless they're called Alan Reach. So that's really expected goals in a nutshell, and that's probably the big one. Because the other stats that we'll use are quite self-explanatory, like shots on goal and what have you. So it's not really today's not really going to be like that big a deep dive. It's more going to be like the available numbers you can find on different websites that we use and pour over. There are some guys out there that do some amazing stuff, like location stats of players. Like they track the location of a player every second of a game and all that. But that's beyond us tonight, and this will be sort of like a geeky version, but still a gentle entry into the world of stats.
Great. So they are the acronyms that we need to know, or the one particular that we need to know. So Peter, here is the real question then. So as far as the stats go, how is this season going? I'm covering my eyes up as I ask you that question, almost as if like I don't want to know the answer.
Well, the interesting thing is, and you alluded to this in the intro, when we first talked about this podcast, we were in a position where points-wise we're doing quite well, because I think we just reached 6th at that point. And all the so-called underlying stats, that is the expected goals, as I just explained, showed that we were quite frankly shit. We were probably around 22nd, 23rd, 21st, depending on which definition of expected goals and which provider of them you use. And this has been going on actually since almost since Luca took over. We massively overperformed at the back end of last season, and that carried into this season. So I was actually thinking at that point it'd be nice to do a podcast where we say, yeah, things are looking good. Like the league table is looking good, but the league table is a big fat liar. And it's very likely that we'll see what you could call a regression in performance, where we'll stop overperforming so mightily and have performances that link up with the results, meaning we'd lose more than we'd win. And lo and behold, that's actually what happens afterwards. So it's one of those issues. It's a bit like the FFP things. I mean, you want to be happy that you're right, but in these instances, it's just a bit shit being right. And I mean, I tend to do this a lot for some reason. So yeah, if you look at the league table, we're 17th. But if you look like if you make a league table using least expected goals, we about just above the relegation zone, and in some of the models actually inside the relegation zone. Right. So it's not really looking good.
Are there any shining lights? Is there anything that suggests that we're about to turn a corner? Is there any kind of hope that we can cling to?
I mean, there's one peculiar stat actually, and we can call this the Adam Reach factor. We're actually quite good at scoring goals from outside the box. There are actually only 3 teams from the top 5 leagues in Europe that are better than us at converting shots from outside the box. We score 1 in every 10 shot from outside the box, which is quite extraordinary. I think the second team in the championship is about 5%. That obviously leads to the question that's not likely to be sustainable in the longer term. So we've been relying on the Adam Reach get out of jail card for a lot of games. So even though we're 17th and everyone's complaining we're underperforming and we're not doing well and we're not playing well, we're actually worse than that. If you could say that, just to make it annoying.
So Peter, I like by a term you just used, which I thought was very very technical and quite foreboding from a mathematical point of view. It was the league table is a big fat liar, which reminds me of sort of an era when I was actually in maths lessons back in school. And what you're basically saying is that when times were better in September and we were sort of we were accumulating points and winning unlikely games, it was because we were defying the odds, and Adam Reach was smacking in goals from 35 yards, which were improbable, as opposed to the underlying factors of the team being in kind of rude health. Is that basically the point?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I don't want to dwell on negatives, but I've got to kind of probe and see, just how bad is it in terms of the stats. So, we've bemoaned Wednesday defensively this season. What can we take from the stats about how our defence has been performing? Is it as bad as it seems to us?
Short answer is yes. The issue is we defend very deeply, and the numbers actually bear that out. We block more shots than I think all the other teams, or at least most other teams in the division. And if you block a lot of shots, it's usually because the shots are taken from quite close to the goal. And if you look at the one thing is the expected goals that we create ourselves, but if you look at the expected goals of the opposition accumulate during the game, that is the quality of chances they have against us. We're actually the worst in the division. So our attacking side of things is actually carrying our team at the moment, even though they're hardly very good as it is.
So Peter, it might be helpful to kind of provide some numbers to actually kind of illustrate this, right? So if I understand this correctly, looking at the exceptionally comprehensive spreadsheets that Peter's provided, on average, Wednesday score a little bit less than 1 goal per game this season so far. But across the course of the season, we're on average conceding at least 1.75, so almost 2 goals per game. So basically shipping 2 goals for every 1 we score, right? And that compares to teams at the sharp end of the division who are typically doing the exact opposite. They're scoring 2 for every 1 they concede or less. And that's the stark reality, isn't it, of the way we're defending, which is, we would have to drastically improve our attacking productivity if we were to overcome that deficiency of conceding at least, a goal, if not 2 goals every game.
And the interesting thing is actually, if you look at our shot conversion, and if you compare to the season of 2016-17, our best season in recent years, we're actually converting more shots into goals. Our conversion rate is 11.2%, and the conversion rate in 16-17 was 9.7%. So the issue here is not our strikers being shit; it's actually the chance creation and the build up to chances that we don't do very well this season, and especially compared to 16-17. I mean, we have a lot fewer passes, and not just the mundane sideways backward passes, but even the forward passes, the passes into deep areas, as it's called analytically, that is into the box or into the 6-yard box. We're one of the worst in the division at completing passes into the box. We're one of the worst teams in the division at crossing the ball, at getting chances close to the goal. So the reason Adam Reach is scoring well this is because he has to, because there's no one else getting goals from anywhere further up the field. I mean, and our strikers are, compared to the input they have, the output that strikers give us goal wise is actually quite decent overall. So it's not really there the problem lies. The problem is further back in the team. That's in midfield. And it's all linked together, obviously. I mean, our defensive issues isn't an issue just with the defense or the goalkeeper. It's also definitely an issue with both the strikers and midfield. And conversely, if you're not attacking well, it's also can be an issue with the defense as well, and definitely also the midfield.
So Peter, this raises an important point, doesn't it? Because there is a point at which you try and explain what you're seeing with your own eyes with the trends that the numbers explain to you. So, Wednesday fans, I think, probably increasingly frustrated with our lack of attacking flair. I mean, that came to a head in the most recent game that we played at Bramall Lane. Maybe that was an exceptional circumstance, but the lack of productivity of the midfield unit and of the ability to create a high press and get balls into the box and create chances for our strikers bears out in the fact that we're just simply we're not creating that movement and that positivity in midfield that would lead us to start to try and overcome some of our defensive deficiencies. And then it bears out in the numbers as well in terms of the amount of pressure that we invite onto ourselves and in a fragile defensive situation start leaking more goals.
Yeah, and I mean, Luca is insistent in several press conferences that he doesn't care how many we concede as long as we score more than the others do. I mean, the Kevin Keegan style of football, right? But Kevin Keegan style of football is getting loads of chances and having comparatively quite a few goals as well. So we're not doing the defensive part good, and we're not doing the chance creation part good. So you need to do either one good to be a team that is going to be thereabouts in the top 6 at the end of the season. And that's really our issue, because in 15-16 and in 16-17 we had a really solid defense, and that was, as I said, we score more goals from attempts we get now than we did in 16-17, even though we finished as highly as we did that season. So that tells you that the difference is definitely the defense, and that's and the way I see it, numbers tell you one thing, but your eyes tell you lots of the same things as well. I think it is we're defending really deeply. We retreat, we don't press the ball, which means the opposition get a lot of time on the ball, and if you look at how often they complete passes into our box. It's also we're also one of the worst in the division in that regard. If you look at those numbers,
I want to just kind of touch back on we were talking about specifically about balls into the box, because we all hear it at Hillsborough. I hear it week in, week out, whereby people just say, just get the ball in the box. There's always a lot of talk about how we don't play well enough with wide players in order to do just that and get crossed into the area. I guess this is probably kind of a question to both of you, and I'm sure, Peter, you'll have some, or you may well have some stats that help kind of bear this out a little bit. Is that actually what we should be doing? Is there evidence to say that the reason we're not doing very well this season is because we're not getting enough balls into the box? Or is that just a load of rubbish? And I guess as well, thinking specifically about headed goals, because we haven't scored very many of them this season.
And that's right. It's actually one of the areas where we really, it's really noticeable how we've changed compared to 16-17. In 16-17, we were the division's best at scoring headed goals. We actually scored a headed goal every other game, roughly. This season, we only have a headed goal every 5 games, and that's 16th in the division. So it's not like it's not what explains our troubles this season. It's just it's very noticeable that we've regressed from 16-17 in this statistic. And if you see how many
not enough ball in the box.
In some regards, yeah. But if you look at like how many of the headed attempts we have, because back in 16-17 we were also one of the top teams in division at how many shots on goal we had from headers. We scored 14% of our headed attempts, and this season we only scored 8% of our headed attempts. So I mean, even if we put more balls into the box, we might not see a bigger return. And the other point is, if you ask like clever people, like truly clever people, not like 3 idiots like us, that are into the coaching part of the game and fusing coaching and analytics. If you think about a cross, like if you put a cross into the box, especially one of those floated crosses, which we seem to do a lot, there's every chance that it's going to be cleared and headed away. I mean, most crosses do not end up as a chance on goal or even close to. So when that headed clearance comes in, and if you have players running into the box, you might be out of organisation defensively. So the opposition actually has an advantage counter-attacking when you put in a lot of crosses, because the team can be anyway unbalanced when you're relying on crosses, and it opens up our defensive organisation, which is very frail as it is. So I wouldn't as per se advocate just pinging in more crosses. But it is noticeable that we have some really good headers of the ball in the team. I mean, Stephen Fletcher and in some regard, Nuhio as well, are really good headers of the ball. And we have a player like Reach. I think his ability to make runs into the box is actually underappreciated because of all the long ranges he scored. But he's picking up some of the traits that Kieran Lee has at being good at coming into the box and actually getting on the end of crosses with either his feet or his head. So we have players that could benefit from more crosses, but do we have the players capable of delivering those good crosses? Reach,
the interesting point, though, Peter, is that the players that we're playing with now are not dissimilar from the players that we've been playing with for the past 2-3 years, right? I mean, there's a few exceptions to that. Obviously, the youngsters who are coming in through the youth team, so the Matt Pennies, the Jordan Thornleys. But the midfield of today is pretty much the midfield we had 2 years ago. You've got players like Adam Reach, Barry Bannon. It's arguably that the style has evolved. And it's interesting to note that even under Carlos, when we were accused of playing defensively and cautiously, we retained possession of the ball very well. Our general possession statistics across the course of the game would be significantly in excess of 50%. We usually have 65% of the possession, and it's been noticeable over the last 2 years just how much we've decreased the amount of not just crosses into the box, just balls into the box generally, right? In the order of 25 to 30%. I mean, it suggests that there is a more cautious approach under this regime in terms of use of the ball and possibly confidence within the players in terms of their willingness to take on or to play patient football and then to create a chance and to play those strikers into position. We just don't seem to be seeing that in the last 6 to 8 months. Does that bear out in the numbers?
Yeah, that's definitely it. And I mean, it's all fair playing a more cautious style of football. Look at Middlesbrough, for instance. That's what they're doing, and they're doing really well playing that way. But you have to have the organisation to back it up, and we don't have that. So if you rely on being able to absorb pressure from the opposition, rely on being able to play the percentage play instead of overloading when you're going forwards, you need to have that foundation defensively to build from and to resist the opposition. Because that's not, if you're playing cautiously, you're not trying to score more than the opposition, are you? You're trying to nick 1-0 wins in like a George Graham Arsenal style, aren't you? And that's really harks back to what sort of identity and philosophy do we have as a team? Do we have one? Is probably the question. And that's what really jumps out from the numbers. We're a bit of all over the board in some ways. You can't really tell clearly what sort of style of football we're playing from the numbers. Whereas a team like Middlesbrough, it's really clear what style of football they're playing. A team like Brentford, really clear. Swansea, really clear as well. You can tell even from the numbers and joining them together, you can tell, okay, this is a team focusing on passing and possession football. This is a team focusing on percentage play and balls into the box and so on. And we don't have an identity, do we?
Well, I'm going to challenge that a little bit, Peter. I don't know if anyone's who's listening has been following Experimental 361, which is a fantastic football analytics site if you don't already. But they have a beautiful 2x2 which talks about kind of the level of activity within your attack and defence, which is kind of a way of basically saying, are you creating a lot of chances or fielding a lot of chances? Well, we've kind of talked about the fact that Wednesday are doing less of the former and more of the latter. So the way they classify the quadrant we fall into is busy defence, quiet attack, right? I mean, that's pretty much bears out, the way that Wednesday have played most games this season, and therefore we are reliant on those shots from outside the box, maybe set piece situations, in order to grind out results. And it would then be reliant on us having a well-organised defence, which I think we could say from the numbers and from reality hasn't been the case this season. So maybe that's our identity. By sitting deep and holding the ball, we invite pressure onto ourselves in the hope that we're going to be able to take those one or two rare chances that come up from a set piece. But I don't think that's the identity that Wednesday would aspire for, or that any of us as fans would aspire for. So it suggests that we're kind of clinging on for dear life rather than having an assertive personality in this division.
And it's also maybe a function of Luca's philosophy. There was an interesting interview a few days ago in the Star where he said, sorry, not in the Star. It was in Football International, the Dutch football magazine, and he basically said, "I'm trying to give the players more responsibility. I'm not the gaffer. I'm not the archetypal English manager that will tell all the players how to do exactly what they're doing and eyebrow the ball in and early doors and all that analytics and stuff. I'm trying to get the players to take responsibility on the pitch and not telling them exactly what they're going to do and how to play up the opposition, but to adapt to the situation as it moves along, because you can do all the planning ahead, but if the team that turns up that you're playing against play differently, if you only have a plan to fall back on, then you're going to struggle. You have to be able to adapt. And he's saying that our players aren't used to that, and that our players maybe aren't suited to that. So that leads to two conclusions. Either his approach should be ditched, and probably him as a manager should be ditched, and we should bring in an old-style English gaffer and have a flurry of results in maybe 6 months, and then in 6 months time we're going to struggle again. Or we rely on a very long-term process of Luhukai changing the players' philosophy and approach to playing football games. It's a bit of an ask of our fans who, as it is, are very impatient. But I think that's probably what he's going for, and that's what we might be seeing on the pitch. Players being unsure what to do because they're being told to figure it out themselves. Whether that's wrong or right.
I mean, we could change all the players, but we've done at least 3 podcasts on the fact that we can't do that. So maybe we don't go there. so let's find some silver linings to this season so far, Peter, because it doesn't sound like the brightest of pictures, which probably is borne out by our league position and the general mood around Wednesday over the last couple of. Probably the last month or so. Let's be generous. Who at an individual level is kind of defying gravity and outperforming expectations season so far? I mean, for example, based on the limited number of chances, do we have any strikers who are particularly exceeding expectations? Obviously, we talked about Adam Reach. Any other heroes in otherwise a squad of depressing averages at the moment?
I mean, I would like to start with not the strikers, but Barry Bannon, for better and worse, because I actually see some drawbacks to it as well. If you rank like the midfielders from different like chance creation, ability to progress the ball, and all these different stats that people can figure out, Barry Bannon is top 3 championship midfielder, along with actually Oliver Norwood from United, and he's top of all those stats, and no other player from Wednesday are in the top 50, which is the drawback, because we really see from the numbers, as we've seen with our eyes as well. I mean, it's not a novel conclusion to say that we are relying too much on Barry Bannon, but you can really tell if you look at the numbers how much we're relying on him. And Barry Bannon is not a 7 out of 10 performance every game sort of player. He's hot and cold, a bit like Forrest Jerry. So when he's cold, we as a team, when we go forwards, we're cold. And when he's hot, we look quite decent, can create some chances. But we're relying on a mood player, essentially, to create our season. And if you look at the strikers, they actually, as I alluded to earlier, they're actually quite decent. Fletcher, if you look at his expected goals versus his actual goals, he's only slightly under how much he's supposed to have scored, so to speak. Nuhiu, he's underperforming quite significantly. He's a bit like the old Nuhiu. He's got 1 goal and in quotation marks should have 3 goals. Lucas Xiao is an interesting case. If you look at expected goals, he should only have had 2 goals, but he's actually scored 5 goals. So he's massively overperforming, and that has a lot to do with again the sort of goals he scored, obviously from outside the box as well, and from the extremes of the box, which usually don't lead to goals when you shoot from there.
And what about players who aren't in the squad today? So, if you look at kind of the strength of Wednesday's injury table, so the Sam Winnalls, the Gary Hoopers, the Kieran Lees, how would Wednesday compare against the rest of the division if we kind of just looked at raw potential, if we could actually service all of these impact players? Is there kind of a metric out there that would help us to rank that, at least kind of understand our potential if we could get everybody fit and firing?
Yeah, there's a German guy actually that does a metric called goal impact. I mean, these analytics people, they aren't good at names. They'll probably need the two of you to create a logo and then catch a name, to be honest. But bear with me.
3 twats with some stats.
Exactly. No, what goal impact does is it's actually really, in its essence, it's actually really simple. It's measuring during the time the player is on the pitch, how is the team's goal difference? I mean, the goals scored minus the goals conceded, and it creates a metric out of that, and you can evaluate players' careers. You can actually also see this player, usually a player at this age with this position, would be at this point have this goal impact at this point of his career, but he's here, so that signifies he has a lot of potential, for instance. So he's actually, this German guy has actually spotted quite a few players that at 16, 17 were just breaking through, where he actually said, this player's got a lot of potential, and it turned out they were really good. And if you look at that statistic, goal impact for us, take the average of our squad. We actually, I think, it's about 8th in the division, and it is quite a funny stat because you've got some wild teams in there. I mean, Wigan are 5th in that ranking of squads, and again, it's not how good the player is perceived to be by fans or how famous he is or anything. It's simply looking at when this player plays, are the team conceding less? Are the team scoring more? Then he's a better player than the player where it's vice versa. So I mean, it might be it has been performing quite well actually when you use it for betting. When you rank teams, if you have the starting lineups of 2 teams and look at the goal impacts, it's actually better than most betting odds at figuring out who's the favorite and who isn't the favorite. And he's picked some, especially in Germany, he's picked some massive surprises team wise as well in seasons gone by. So it's,
he's got his parameters about right, hasn't he, Peter? Because I looked at this stat at the beginning of the season, and if memory serves correctly, he had Norwich first in the division for goal impact, and here we are, 17 games in, and they sit proud at the top of the table. And at the other end of the spectrum, he had Rotherham with absolutely 0 goal impact, which okay, they maybe slightly outperform that, but it's probably what we would all expect. It's the spread in between where there seems to be so much flexibility and vulnerability to the way a team plays, and Wednesday seem to be particularly vulnerable to that. That this style doesn't appear to be suiting some of the higher impact players that we have, who need more license for creativity, but or arguably, if you believe Joselu Hukai, need to take more license themselves to create those opportunities, but. It very much kind of brings us to this pivot point in the season.
Yeah, and the other point Luca continually makes, and I think a lot of fans actually miss that from his post-match interviews. He consistently says the players have to trust each other. And when we have a defeat, it's usually the players didn't trust each other. And again, I have to go back to Barry Bannon here because he's really the main culprit in that. He doesn't trust his teammates. He tries a Hollywood pass rather than moving the ball around and trying to progress the ball and trying to get to the wing or trying to just make a simple pass. He wants to make the Hollywood pass because he looks at Joe Pelopessi and he thinks, oh, this guy's not going to create a chance. He looks at Alan Reach and he thinks, oh, he's going to be stopped anyway because they put 2 men on him. So that's the deeper lying issue for me, that we have players...
He's always been like that though, hasn't he?
Yeah, in some respects, yeah. But if you go back a few seasons and look at his numbers, he was actually more of a team player then than he is now because he was playing in a team of players more on his level, so to speak. Whereas now he's indisputably the star of the team, and it doesn't suit him. Just like it doesn't suit Forestieri to be the star of the team, because they try to do too much. They don't. The thing to do if you like the star player and the other team, for instance with Forestieri, they put 2 markers on that player or just mark him really closely. If you use 2 players, there's a lot of space elsewhere on the team for your teammates to take advantage of. But that's not the case if you get the ball and you try to dribble the 2 players on you. You need to move the ball quickly to use that space to progress the ball, to create chances. And again, we're not playing as a team. That's really that's really what it harks back to, and that's also what you see from the numbers. Actually, they backed that up. We don't pass the ball, we don't progress the ball, we don't defend as a unit. We defend individually. We have a lot of blocks, shots. We have a lot of tackles, which suggests that it's one-on-one situations rather than a unit or a block of defenders diffusing the situation before it becomes a dangerous chance. So these are quite clear issues that the numbers bear.
All right, let's talk worst case scenario then. If things don't improve, okay, if we continue playing the way that we are, and we continue on our current kind of path, the backstop, to use a bit of a Brexit phrase there, that I think a lot of us as fans have kind of, we've even said this, I've said this to a few of my friends, which is, yeah, well, at least there's always going to be 3 worse teams in this league, and we could even name the teams that are going to be worse than us this season. So there's a lot of kind of different areas that we've looked at where, we're 16th in the league for this, and we're 17th in the league for that, and we're 21st in the league for the other. can we afford to rest on the laurels of there are going to be three teams worse than us this season?
So the expected goals stat, Peter, has a kind of a sibling, doesn't it, in terms of expected points? So essentially, if you play out all of the probabilities of scoring across a team and then compare and contrast them with the opposition, simulate games, you get to kind of a simulated league table, right? And there is a kind of a version of this, James, which stands out there at the moment. You know, Wednesday sitting in 17th, and it ranks the probabilities of where we might finish at the end of the season. The very good news for us is that the likelihood of us finishing in the bottom three is anywhere between 1 and 4, maybe 5%. Likelihood of us finishing mid-table is a spread of anywhere between 5 and 6% for every single position between 18th and 8th. So, Wednesday are performing generally as a mid-table team, provided that we continue to score those exception goals. Adam Reach keeps on hitting them from 35 yards. And the other piece of good news is that Ipswich Town are in our division, who have a nearly 50% probability of finishing absolute rock bottom of the division. So right now, there's at least one of those positions taken up, and Preston and Rotherham, despite some good results, are kind of spreading between 10 and 15% for the other two positions as well. So I think the short answer, I'll give you an elongated version, is that yes, there probably are three worst teams in the division, but we need to get on with beating them. We also need to get on with dealing with the obvious deficiencies within our own squad. But there's a lot of games to be played, and I'm sure those probabilities will change as we go through the festive period.
Okay, fair enough. So I think that kind of wraps up the season so far in numbers. Let's move on to our next section of Owls About Stat, and that is Stat of the Month, where each of the three of us picks out our favourite kind of obscure statistic that we have spotted. I'm just going to mention now, mine's rubbish, because I only had about 10 minutes to find it. So I'm just kind of setting it up now. I'm going to go last. So I'll let you two kind of take all the glory here, because mine is going to be rubbish. James, let's go with you first. What is your stat of the month?
You're setting me up here, James, aren't you? You're basically making me go first so I come up with a rubbish stat, and then you're going to come trailblazing at the back end, and your rubbish stat's going to be a really good stat.
No, seriously, it's rubbish. It is rubbish.
All right, we'll hopefully be able to edit that down to a short segment then, where you just bomb at the end. That'll be brilliant. So my stat is I don't know if it's obscure. I may not have taken the brief completely literally here, because it's a number that's been in the public eye actually for the last couple of weeks, but it's one that fascinates me for a number of reasons, which is negative 8.8%, which is the drop off on average this season so far, according to a study by the Times newspaper, between weekend and midweek attendances in the Championship. Now, I think we all know as football fans that it's perfectly logical that attendances drop off into the midweek. Less people with free time, plenty of people with competing responsibilities, jobs, bad weather, long travel, etc. But why that's startling is the same statistic last season, 2017-18, was negative 4%. So in one season, the drop-off rate for attendances in midweek has doubled. Wow. And why that's so problematic for Championship clubs and for clubs broadly within the Football League is there is still a high dependency on gate receipts for income. We've talked in the FFP pods just on how important that is for a club like Wednesday, which still has a very, very good loyal following and drives a high proportion of its income from ticket sales. And at the same time, there's a lot of concern that drop-off is being accelerated by the availability of games to watch online. So whether that's using iFollow on the weekend or the Sky Red button in midweek. You can relate to this. If you're a fan that typically travels hundreds of miles for a midweek away fixture, or you could sit at home and watch it using your satellite subscription, there's logic to why you might choose the latter option, even if many people would say that the right thing to do as a fan is obviously to get off the sofa and go to the game. It has a profound impact on income. It certainly accentuates the gulf between those teams that have less reliance on gate receipts, i.e. the relegated clubs from the Premier League, those that are still gaining parachute payments. And it's coming to the head in the form of some direct rebellion amongst the Championship clubs in terms of pushing back on the new TV deal that's been agreed with Sky. So very, very pertinent to a lot of the conversations we've been having about the level of healthy competition in the Championship, whether it's a level playing field or whether those teams that get relegated have an unfair advantage. Very relevant to a club like Wednesday, who, still, as I said, have a high reliance on fans coming through the turnstiles. And a situation that I think, for many purists or just traditional fans, that those of us who care about the game would say is a great shame for reducing the quality of atmosphere at games in the Championship as well. So something to keep a real eye on as we go through the season, whether that is a trend that sustains, or whether maybe there's something of a fan reaction against and we start to see something of a moderation. But certainly a concerning statistic in the supporting realm of the Championship as it stands.
That's a huge statistic, really, because we kind of talked a lot at the start of the season about this being the first season where you can watch, every Championship midweek game. You can watch it on the Sky Red button, and would it make any difference to attendances? If that's, kind of like a doubling of the drop from weekend to midweek, that's huge. Yeah, it would be really interesting to know the numbers of how much clubs are getting from the increased TV availability of midweek games compared to what the gate receipts would be had that extra drop not happened, and whether this ultimately is financially beneficial for clubs or not, wouldn't it?
Well, in the short term, okay, we have an answer to that, which is that there is no financial impact, because we're still under the same television rights deal as in prior years. So, essentially clubs are getting no incremental impact from Sky. There is an increase next year. I think the total spread of TV income to the Football League increases from about 90 million to about 120 million next year, but spread across 72 clubs with the mathematics that goes through, it's not a significant amount of additional income per club. I think it's about 500,000 per team or something along those lines. So it is at the root of why there is a big debate right now about whether the TV deal is equitable or whether the Championship clubs deserve a greater slice of the pie, and that has very impactful considerations for the rest of the pyramid.
I've got it in my head, and I might be completely wrong here, but I had it in my head that fans in the UK can use the I want to call it Wednesday player, and it's not been called that for years. But the thing that you guys use to watch the games over in the States?
Yeah, iFollow.
That in the UK you can watch a game on iFollow. You've got to pay for it separately. And I might be making this up. So I kind of thought that there's got to be an extra revenue stream there coming into clubs if you can pay whatever £9.99 to watch a game in the UK through iFollow.
That would be outside of the TV deal, so there would, in theory, be some potential incremental income coming through that. But if you've maybe got fans in the order of low hundreds who are doing that on a weekly basis, even at a tenner a pop, which is quite steep, frankly, for one game, it's not going to make a significant impact. And obviously, getting a fan to pay £10 to watch an iFollow is probably a stretch, but that's a significant discount to what they'd pay if they were going through the gate. So it's troubling for clubs that do rely on gate income, is what I'm coming to. And I think it lays bare this dilemma between the riches of the Premier League and just the crazy amounts of money that those clubs get from TV income, and those clubs elsewhere in English football who rely on gate income and frankly are being disenfranchised by the way that TV is monopolising the agenda.
Absolutely. Right, Peter, what is your stat of the month?
Well, it's not as good as James's, that's for sure. Hopefully better than yours.
It will be.
Later on. Well, I've just stayed within the theme. Really, it's not that obscure, and it's quite intuitive as well. If you look at the probability of each goal we've scored this season, again using the expected goals, how likely was the shot from this position under those circumstances of being a goal. 12 of our 21 goals have been less likely than odds of 10 to 1. So that tells you a bit about how we're really relying on these crazy long shot goals. I mean, if you add them together and say how likely is it that you've scored 12 goals from these sort of chances, and you multiply all the probabilities, you're looking at odds like I don't know, 200, 300, 400 to 1 that we've scored all those goals. So again, sorry to say within the theme, but it's really a measure of how we've been overperforming, and we might not be seeing, even though it's been bad and frankly the derby was quite painful to watch. It might actually get worse before it gets better. So that was my cheery note of the month.
Yeah, going down the positive route there. That's good. Right, so my start of the month it's a number, and it's the number 11. Nothing to do with number of players on a football team or anything like that. It is simply that should we lose to Derby this coming Saturday, it will be our 11th defeat to them in the second tier, which will make them the team that we have lost to the most at this level ever. So 11 would be our biggest number of defeats to a club at championship level, making Derby officially our bogey team in the second tier of English football.
I told you it would be devastating. I don't think that's a bad stat at all, James. I think that's actually really startling, because if you think about the last couple of years, it felt like we'd finally broken the Derby hoodoo, right? Kind of under Carlos, we started actually beating them. But it looks like we're right back on trajectory.
I mean, they are. I mean, obviously, these stats are a little skewed by the fact that there are teams that we've played more than others at this level. I think Ipswich are the team that we've played most at this level of any team at all. But I think Derby come in kind of second or third in terms of who we've played most at this second tier level. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly, more than half the games that we've played against them in the championship we've lost. So we've really got to make sure that we don't lose on Saturday for many reasons.
Interestingly, 11 is also the number of second tier games of Wednesdays I've attended and seen us lose, out of 16, that is. So there's a good case to be made that with a win percentage of 12.5 and a points per game of about 0.6, I should probably just stay away this entire season, and we'd have an improvement in our form.
Great. I look forward to when you're over in February then, and Wednesday losing consistently while you're going to the games. That's good stuff. I had a reserve stat, by the way, and it's not. This was actually originally going to be the stat that I was going to use, just because I was a little startled as to why it's possible. No surprise that Barry Bannon obviously is the player that's picked up the most bookings for us this season. He's taken over from Sam Hutchinson in the pretty much a booking a game stakes. But our second most booked player this season, remarkably, considering the fact that he's just not played all that many games, is Ashley Baker, who I think's only played 7 games but picked up 5 bookings. So there, to me, is the sign of a player that's maybe slightly struggling a little bit. Right, this brings us to section 3 of Owls About Stat, and that is Mythbusters. Now, the idea here is that in future episodes, we'll kind of throw this open to you and let you kind of send in your kind of perception of things, and we'll look at whether or not it's right or it's wrong. We'll kind of put the stats around what it is that you kind of want us to look into. Obviously, because this is episode 1, we've come up with our own, and we've got a couple of kind of commonly talked about things among the fan base over the last month or so that we are going to put to our resident expert, Peter, to see whether or not there is anything in them at all. So number one of our double header is all about Carlos. Now, he obviously came back out of the woodwork a few weeks ago, did a few interviews, did a lot of talking about Sheffield Wednesday. Anyone would think that he's out of work and he's looking for a job somewhere. And there was this kind of theory going around the fan base that thought it was better with Carlos, and this theory that he added value to the playing staff at Wednesday. Peter, did he or didn't he?
Well, he just overall he didn't. I'm sorry to say. The quote from him is actually that, and I quote: "We brought in players with value, and the value of the players has now gone up 4 or 5 times more than what we paid." And then he mentions some of the players and how he's very proud of what he did and how he created value for the players he brought into the club. Again, that's not true. I mean, he spent a lot of money on transfers, even excluding his last season where Roach's transfer and Van Aken's transfer will figure in the accounts. He spent £21 million on transfers during his time at the club, and the wage bill grew by £50 million during his time. If you compare that to Stuart Gray, his predecessor, Stuart Gray spent £127,000 on transfers, and the wage bill increased by 1.5 million during his time at the club. This was a guy who finished 9th in the championship. Remember, so if you add those numbers up and you look at the extra wages we spent in the season, we were actually looking at Carlos's first 2 seasons being an extra spending compared to Stuart Gray's time of a combined £60 million. And you can look at the team now, and you can look at the team now and ask yourself, is this a team better equipped for finishing 9th than when Carvajal joined the club? I would have my doubts about that. Wow. So what I'm basically saying is Carlos is playing the card that we did. Well, we have discussed also in the FFP podcast that you invest in players. You don't buy players because they're famous or because they have a name and because they're of whatever fan-related thing with them. You buy players because you invest in them and expect their value and their stock to increase so you can make a profit on them. This is the Brentford model, and how Brentford bankroll being a club that can spend around 10th in the division, even though their revenue is about 22nd in the division. So he's essentially trying to tell us that we did that when he was here, and we didn't. We bought. Sorry to say, we bought dots. They're not increasing in value as a whole. So yeah, there are a few of those that they bought, obviously, that increased in value. I mean, if you take Forestieri, if you take Bannon, if you take Winnell and Reach, those 4 players we got for a cheaper price than what they're worth now. But if you look at the remaining 21 players he signed, and he signed 21 more players than those 4, there's no progress in the value. And bear in mind, during the 2 years he was here, the inflation in the transfer market, both worldwide but also in the championship, was absolutely insane. You're looking at increased rates of like 20-30% more paid for a player of similar quality, just because more money is coming into the game. I mean, this is why you have players in the Premier League that are bid par players being sold for like £40 million now, where, say, 5 years ago they'd be worth £5 million because there's more money in the game. So even in this environment where the player values are increasing exponentially, Carlos, with a few exceptions, did not create value with his transfers. And obviously, in this piece, he says he takes ownership of the transfers. We've had this discussion before. Was it the transfer committee? Did he actually do the deals? Is he innocent in it? But this piece of interview suggests very heavily that he was the guy signing the players, and he's taking ownership of some fairy tale story that their values increased, which is not the case. And again, we had all this money. We had £60 million over 2 seasons. £60 million. it's not as much as the parachute payment clubs, but if you invest that wisely, if you invest it the Brentford way, if you do your homework on players, if you spend some money on analysing players at other clubs, prepare for the next 3 or 4 transfer windows, you'll be able to do so much with £60 million. And we've done essentially nothing. We're right back to where we were. And that's really...
So, James, it's fair to say that the idea behind this segment is that we will offer some objective analysis to cut through and fact check some of these questions that come to us. Peter may have set a slightly low bar there in terms of possibly offering a few opinions. However, listen carefully to the numbers. In valuation terms, Carlos did not add 4 to 5 times the value of the players that he signed. So, Peter, it sounded like a slight axe to grind there. I could be wrong.
Oh yeah, it's just. I mean, there's a concept in. Sorry to bring this into the podcast because it should probably remain in the private WhatsApp conversation between us. But there's a German term called a Schnellficker, which is really quickly translated. It's a quick shacker. It's the kind of guy who runs around with his shirt unbuttoned down to his navel in a nightclub. He's too old to be there. His hairline's receding, but he still thinks he can score the good-looking girls. That's kind of like who Carlos was to us. And now he's trying to tell us that we had such a good time together. Whereas he shacked us and he left us there in the pub toilet and without the cleanings even. And now he's trying to tell us that it was a really good time. We had good times together, fair enough, but don't try to tell us you added value to the club. You didn't. We got absolutely thrown down the river, and Chancery's money's been wasted. That's the truth of the matter.
I think that's a fairly conclusive answer on that one. Right then, so the second of our double header tonight is right. Okay, so this is something actually that we've talked about a bit on the Wednesday week, and I think there's a fair few fans that have mentioned stats related to this. So, Peter, Cameron Dawson. Obviously, he's had a fairly mixed season. There's been various opinions knocking around about him, but from a statistic point of view, there's the stats going around that he's actually, the best keeper in the division because of the number of saves that he's made per goal he's conceded. Is there any truth in that?
Short answer is no. I think you touched on this last time, and James, you and Fudge were a bit trolling towards Victoria, but I think the point you were trying to make is if you make a lot of saves, it's because you face a lot of chances. And I mean, a way to relativize this stat of making saves is to look at how many saves you make for each goal you concede. If you look at that statistic, because it's true what Victoria was saying on the last Wednesday week podcast, that he is the keeper with the most saves in division. But if you look at saves per goal instead, his stats bear him out to be mid-table, to be 12th in the division. So the real story here is he is making a lot of saves, but it's only because he's facing a lot of shots, and he's not doing more than a par for the course job of keeping the ball out of the net. And it's the same picture you get when you look at again. I'm sorry to hark back to expected goals, but you can also look at the expected goals value of the shots you face, and then you can look at a keeper and say, okay, you should have conceded 5 goals, you conceded 6 goals, so maybe you're worse than the average keeper. And if you look at Cameron Dawson, he's actually just about a ratio of 1-to-1. I mean, for each expected goal he faces, he concedes a goal. So is that good? Is that bad? No, it's neither. It's average. So he's not the best keeper in the world, but he's not, as some were making out very crudely at Hillsborough a few weeks ago, the worst keeper in the world. So for a young guy his age, I suppose that's quite good. Will he improve? We've no way of knowing. But if you look at expected goals faced for keepers in previous seasons, Wildsmith last season did significantly better. Westwood did better in 16-17 and especially in 15-16. So if you compare Dawson to the keepers we had the last few seasons, he's not the best of them. He's the worst of them in relative terms. But he's just an average keeper, which is, I guess, fair enough considering we're an average team.
Okay, fair enough. So that is a couple of myths well and truly busted, and we're after your suggestions for things that you'd like us to tackle in future editions of Owls About Stats. So if there's something that you really believe or you really want to know whether or not it's true or not, then drop us a line and we will look into it and we'll well and truly bust that myth for you. Right now, James Allen, I'm going to hand over to you for our next section, which is where we reminisce about days gone by.
Yeah, and wouldn't it be nice if we could just do that all the time? You may have noticed a theme on Owls Americast recently that we've just decided to jettison the present tense and just live in the past, which is it's probably not a bad idea right now as a Wednesdayite. But what we're going to do with this segment, James, is we're going to try and look at the past through the prism of numbers. Which means we'll be selective about the past that we choose, and we'll find the numbers that look like they're probably a little bit rosier than the ones today. But we're going to, in very timely sense, go back to 1998 today, because today we're recording on November the 21st, the eve of Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving Eve, I guess, if you want to use that balance. And a cruising victory for Sheffield Wednesday, 3-1 at home against Manchester United. One of the last big nights for Wednesday at Hillsborough in the Premier League, really, I guess. A Saturday I remember well because I was working at W.H. Smith's on Fargate, and I had to sprint for the tram to get to the game for kickoff because my shift finished at 2:30, which was poor planning. But what we thought would be interesting is that was a season of transition for Wednesday. We were kind of coming off the high of the mid-90s, but it was before we properly fell through the trapdoor into the Championship. So where were we in that season relative to where we stand now in the kind of description that Peter's given us of a fairly troubling season this year. So Wednesday went into that game on kind of a bit of a patchy streak. We'd had some good results. We'd beaten Arsenal at home in the famous 1-0 victory when Paolo Di Canio pushed over Paul Alcock and Lee Briscoe walloped it in front of the Kop. But we'd also had some pretty crushing victories. We'd lost 4-0 away at Middlesbrough for no apparent reason. But essentially, kind of the points per game in both seasons this year and back in '98, not dissimilar. Wednesday were sitting on about 1.1 points per game when they came off the Man United win. Today we're on about 1.18, so it's not so far. We're basically getting pretty much a point a match gets us to roughly just above the relegation zone position at the end of the season if that projection carries on. In 1998-99, we finished 12th. Quite respectable, really, in the middle of the Premier League. Maybe we can aspire to finish middle of the pack in the Championship this year. Of course, what came next in 1999-2000 doesn't bear repeating, so let's hope this isn't the precipice that we follow in historical terms. But where I'm really going to centre this little piece of reminiscence on is a very rare event that happened at Hillsborough that afternoon, which was a goal from one Wim Jonk. A very lanky World Cup playing Dutch midfielder who was a crushing disappointment at Hillsborough. And I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of compare him with the current muscles from, not Brussels, muscles from Rotterdam or somewhere like that, Joey Pelopessi. As an aside, by the way, I've been told that I objectify too many of the Wednesday squad. That was by my wife, so I'm going to try and be a little bit less physically descriptive in the way in which I describe our players in the future. But Wim Jonk is a bit of an enigma at Hillsborough, principally because he was shit for the vast majority of the time that he played for us, despite his distinguished record. He spent 3 years, apparently, with Wednesday, having been signed for about $2.5 million. Remarkably, he actually played one game of that lineage in the Championship, or Division 1 as was. He played in the terrible game that we played down at Wolves on our first game back after relegation, and I think that was the last we saw of him. But over 3 years, he made 69 appearances at Hillsborough, or playing for Wednesday. Joey's had 32 appearances already in just under 10 months, so he's half of the way there to matching Wim Jonk's appearance record. Wim scored 5 goals in his time with Wednesday, including that one strike in the win against Man United. Joey's only at the one so far, that long-range strike against Millwall, but he's got a bit of time to catch up, so we'll give him that. And that's kind of where the comparison falls down a little bit, because basically stats apparently didn't exist in the 1990s. We know that Jonk assisted 13 times in 3 years, which for a midfielder is pretty miserable. Pelopessi, I haven't actually got an assist stat for him, so I'll have to try and dig that out. Peter will slap me later on. But where I thought it would get really interesting is if you use the obvious reliable statistical database that is Pro Evolution Soccer. So I dug out the the PES history book and found that when Wim Jonk was actually quite good in the earlier part of the 1990s, he had an attacking rating of 77. Joey's in 2018 edition only got 66. Vim's stamina apparently is very impressive. He had 87 against 74 for Pelopessi, and Jonk had an amazing passing accuracy of 87 and shot power of quite startling 95, which frankly we never saw at Hillsborough. Joey only managed 75 and 71 respectively. So on face value, you'd say that Wim Jonk was actually the superior midfielder, but in typical Wednesday fashion, we signed him 4 years beyond his peak. So he was utter cobblers by the time we had him. So my conclusion is Joey's productivity in 6 to 8 months at Hillsborough already exceeds that of Wim Jonk. So although we beat Man United on this day 20 years ago, at least we've got Pelopessi to try and get us out of the Championship mire for the rest of the season. And maybe eventually we'll learn not to sign players 4 to 5 years past their prime. So there you go. On this day 20 years ago, in numbers, probably a happier memory, frankly, than potentially one might happen on Saturday.
I really like the way that you dwelled on Wim Jonk's stamina in the middle of all that. I thought that was a beautiful thing. Were you at that game, by the way, James?
I was, yeah. No, having made the trip across Sheffield from my shift, sitting on the tills at WH Smith. Yes, I was. My dad had managed to snag a ticket in the executive boxes somehow, so I took along a couple of friends from school. One of whom supported Man United, so that was particularly nice. And the other one, for some unknown reason, was a Blade, who thought it would be fun to come and watch Man United. And I guess they didn't get to see big teams. Oh, still don't get to see big teams. And it was very satisfying. So it was sort of a happy memory for my Wednesday season ticket holding time, I should say, before I moved away from Sheffield. And as I was saying earlier, before everything fell apart the following year, it was kind of one of those big games where Wednesday rose to the occasion and turned over Man U in a pretty emphatic way. I mean, that was the treble winning side of 98-99. So we did pretty well once again in that season.
Absolutely. Right then, so this brings us to our final section of Owls About Stats, and that is looking ahead. So let's look at the month to come. It's a good time to do this because we're coming off the back of an international break, and we are basically looking at the games taking us up to the kind of the crazy busy Christmas period. So our next 5 games, we've already touched on one of these. So we've got Derby at home this coming Saturday. That's followed pretty quickly by Bolton at home the following Tuesday. Games after that, we've got Blackburn away, we've got Rotherham at home, we've got Swansea away. Now, from my position as the realist, I'm going to look at these games and say, well, we've got 3 home games in there, including games against Bolton and Rotherham, and our away games. Blackburn, all right, they're not having a bad season, but it's got to be a game where we can expect to get something out of that. Swansea away, a team that's come down from the Premier League, but they've been a little inconsistent. So, in my head, this is shaping up for a period of games where we should be looking to get, at least 2, maybe 3 wins out of those. Peter, you're going to completely destroy my theory and throw stats at me saying that we're going to lose all 5 now, aren't you?
Well, not really. I mean, even if you look at the performances of the teams, I mean, Bolton and Rotherham, they deserve to be at the bottom of where they are. But remember, we've had similar performances to them. It's not like we've outperformed them over the season. So it might be dangerous to consider them easy games. And if there's one thing we've been victims of for the past few years, it's underestimating teams sometimes. So I think those games are going to be even. But on the flip side, you could also say the Blackburn and the Swansea game is not going to be as uneven as a league position might make out. So it's one of those tricky situations where it could be it's a big spread of possible points. Really, realistically looking at it. And if you look at the odds of the games, you're probably going to see some quite even odds as well, purely down to the championship being so unpredictable and so tight as it is. I mean, if you look at the next few games for the teams below us, they're actually a bit harder if you consider the performances the teams that they're playing have had in the season. So in some ways, this could be quite an ideal rehabilitation period for Lukai if he can actually get the team playing to some sort of style and get us a few points. So we might not shoot up the table, but the spectre of relegation, which is league position wise anyway, looks close now. Should probably be a little less daunting come Christmas.
And we need that run, don't we, Peter? I mean, I joke about us kind of, establish ourselves in mid-table, which is not necessarily the most lofty goal, but we want to be going into the festive period with at least 2 or 3 wins out of those games, just to kind of give us a position of stability and maybe some time for us to then kick on a little bit and deal with some of the technical problems that we were describing earlier in the podcast. And the teams above us as well have got some trickier games over the same period. Looking at it, so I think Brentford have got to go. They play Middlesbrough. They've got West Brom as well. Swansea, the same as us. So, there's kind of an opportunity for us to creep up the table a little bit. What I'm interested in is kind of the XG effect here. So again, you can kind of almost kind of pitch every game on a probability basis, right? If you aggregate that, and presumably our hardest game is the first of the run. Is Derby at home? Is that fair for us?
Derby aren't actually doing it quite as well as the league position suggests. So they might. I mean, watching them play, they are quite inconsistent as well, and they are quite reliant on a few players, especially up front. And they did have issues at the beginning of the season, but it does look like they are more of a unit now, more of a team that has an expression and a clear idea of how to play the game of football. And there's obviously the talismanic factor of the manager as well. So it's a bit annoying that we get this game first in this run of games, because the mood is really sour, and the Derby didn't really do much to improve that. It was more of a relief than it was a celebration, wasn't it? So it could be a nasty game, because Derby will be one of those teams like Norwich. If they get the noses in front and we would use down tools, they could maul us because of some of the attacking flair they have in the team, and in a guy like Mason Mount, who's clearly a Premier League player playing at Championship level. So that's a bit of a worry that we play Derby. But conversely, you could say if the solidity defensively, on at least the appearance of defensive solidity we showed at the Derby, because I actually disagree that we were good defensively in that game. If we keep that up and we can stifle Derby, they do have a few out. They don't only have a few outlets going forward, so it might actually be easier to do than against United, who have spread out the burden of chance creation a bit more than Derby do. So if we get a result against Derby, I would definitely take a draw in that game. No questions asked. That would set us up nicely for Bolton, Blackburn, and Rotherham. And I mean, anything 6 points or above from those 3 games should really get some sort of positivity back with our fans. Again, it's not going to mean we're going to shoot up the table and in the playoffs, but it should mean we don't have to worry about relegation, which should enable us to be able to play more of the young players and get them ready and get them experienced enough and get them established as championship players for next season, because this season is about next season. It's not about this season. And we need to get to a point where relegation is so far away and the spectre of promotion, I would just forget about that now. And hopefully our chairman will as well. And just focus on laying the foundations for next season and doing that properly. And playing some players who aren't the best players on the day, but who in a year's time we're going to rely on anyway. So we might as well give them their experience. I mean, that's essentially what Luca is doing with Dawson, isn't it? And we need to do that with more players. And again, here's the trust factor. We as fans need to trust not Luca, but we need to trust the youngsters that they might have blips in their performances, which you do as a youngster, as a developing player. But over time, over games, you will improve and show a trend line that is going upwards, even if individual performances will vary quite widely. So that's sort of my take on it.
Cool. Peter, thank you very much. That's going to pretty much wrap us up then for the first edition of Owls About Stats. As we said at the beginning, it's a bit of a tester for us. We're certainly going to look to kind of tweak a few bits and bobs. We'll be very interested in your feedback on this kind of pilot edition, if you like, of Owls About Stat. And we'd also very much like your questions for Mythbusters for episode 2. You can contact me directly at James Marriott. You can get hold of, James Allen, are you likely to be drunk now for the next 48 hours celebrating whatever Thanksgiving celebrates?
It's just basically drinking eggnog and eating turkey. That's Christmas. Oh, no, it's Thanksgiving. Oh, we do it twice. There you go. We basically do one big dress rehearsal now, and then we do it all again in a month's time. So, apart from the taking care of the kids part of it, that's pretty much the plan until Monday.
Sounds like a plan. And, tell us whereabouts you are on Twitter.
So you can find me at Manhattan Owl, as you said, James, very much a kind of a start for 10 in terms of how we set up this pod. So really looking forward to, I hope, some constructive feedback. I'm sure we'll get some unconstructive feedback as well. We welcome that as well, just for the fun of it. Find me at Manhattan Owl on Twitter, and always happy to answer questions and engage in constructive discussion.
Now, Peter, you are the one out of the three of us that doesn't just do this on a podcast. You will continue doing this on your actual Twitter account, because you do tend to stick out quite a few of your own stats and certainly kind of retweeting and quoting quite a lot of really interesting stuff that's out there as well. So, tell us whereabouts to find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm at PLOEHMANN, P. Lohman. And as you said, that's the numbers in there. And a few of the things we touched on tonight, I've tweeted or retweeted previously. So if you want to find just the numbers, either go look at my timeline or just shoot me a tweet. I'm always happy to answer. And like you guys, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this is going to be received. Whether there's an interest in looking through the prism of numbers rather than just the prism of bloody rubbish.
Bloody rubbish. We have got an Owls About Stats Twitter account, which unsurprisingly is at Owls About Stats. There's nothing on it yet, and we don't even have an official logo yet to stick on that page. But I've got it installed on my Twitter app on my phone. So if you want to drop us a tweet via that account, by all means, go ahead, and we will. We'll look forward to receiving your feedback and your questions for us to look at in, I would guess, around about a month's time in episode 2 of Owls About Stat. Thank you for your company.